Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar, A Framework for Youth Collective Empowerment, presented by Hrasok. Okay. So to use a closed caption, please click on the CC below on the bottom that says caption. And para el uso de español, lamentablemente hoy no pudimos conectarnos con Patricia, tiene problemas, está en Florida y la conexión de internet de ella está muy mala por las tormentas, pero vamos a grabarla próximamente y les enviamos la grabación completa en español. Okay. For American Sign Language, please, interpreter, you just need to hover over the video of the person. We already did it for you. She's pinned already. Kathy is pinned. But if you need to do it yourself, you hover over the video and you see the three dots and you can click on it and you can select pin from the menu. Okay, next slide. That's yours, Josie.
Okay, welcome everyone to our fifth and final youth engagement webinar. My name is Josie Badger and I am the project director for the RAISE Center. RAISE is funded by the Rehab Service Administration and we provide technical assistance on transition to other parent centers across the country, as well as families and young adults with disabilities. We have been working on providing information on youth engagement really over the past 6 years, but specifically with these toolkits over the past 2 years. And this is really important to our goals and mission at RAISE, which are to support youth with disabilities and their families to have successful adult lives, especially in employment and independent living. So obviously this is important to all of our work. And today we will have our friend and guest, Hrasok, who has helped to develop the last 4 toolkits. And I'm really excited for you to hear of the most recent and hopefully support you in implementing it in your work, wherever that may be. So Ali, it's up to you.
Thank you, Josie. I'm so excited to be back for, I can't believe it's like 5th final toolkit. We've really enjoyed developing this series and seeing how the work that you all are doing are really matching the build of each of these toolkits too. So I'm hoping that you are familiar with us, familiar with the toolkits. If you're not, feel free to look up the ones that have come before this toolkit so that you can really see this series the way that it was intended, which is again kind of building, and we'll talk about that. If you have been with us before, this will all feel very familiar to you. So we want to first get an idea of who's with us live on this webinar today. So if you could utilize the chat function of our Zoom and talk about what role you most identify with. So whether it's parent, professional, parent center representative, a mix of a lot of different things, we want to see it. So I'm going to pull up my chat as you all are talking. I love it. People were like responding. Either they were like, we know what you do here, Ali. We're going to respond before you even mention it. Awesome. So we've got a lot of parent center representatives, parent advocates that are here. Yeah, a lot of folks feeling like they're wearing both hats, right? You're a parent and you're a representative or advocate, professional for this work. Awesome. So some folks that work directly with the youth in transition services. Awesome. We saw a parent to a 23-year-old self-advocate. We love that. Hopefully this is all useful for them. Seeing a lot of different states, which is nice to see too. Have a teacher, educators, program directors, community. Awesome. So I'm so glad that we have a mix today because I really do think that all of these toolkits, and especially this last one, are so relevant for all of the work that you just mentioned. And circling back, I think, to some earlier toolkits, we really structured these toolkits to be a sort of framework and really a jump start into the work that you all can put in within your own organizations, communities, groups that you work with. So today, when we think about our goals, we want to provide a context and relevance for the information that's in specifically this toolkit, discuss the general structure, provide some content level examples for you all. But again, remembering that that overarching goal is to leave the webinar with just a tool that you can take back to other community members, other organization members, to continue to engage youth and young adults in this process and support the work that you're already doing. So I always like to ground us. You've heard this from me before if you've been on the webinars, grounding us in the importance of all of this. This is the youth engagement continuum that we've really used as a basis for the structuring and the building of the different toolkits that we've presented. So everything we've talked about: youth services, what that means, began talking about youth development and youth leadership. The very last toolkit started to sort of get into this zone right here between collective empowerment and systemic change, where we were talking about, now that youth begin to develop their own leadership skills, how can we be empowering them as individuals to move into some of this systemic change? This toolkit takes it a step further. We're really moving towards that action component and how we bring everyone together in order to accomplish that. So not just feeling empowered as individual leaders, but feeling empowered as an individual leader that is a part of a bigger system and working with one another to achieve whatever goal it is that your group is looking to achieve. So the structure of the toolkit, same as our other three that I had presented personally. We have 5 key components that you're going to see, and I'll pull out that list in a second. Each of those components, we give a little bit of a background, so some literature-based explanation of why those components are included in this bigger picture of what we're talking about. And then the second page to all of those components has a framework. And again, the reason we're calling it as a framework is because it's just a general translation of how those components, or that component in particular, can relate to your work with youth, and really provides that starting point for you to take that back, start some conversations and development in that area in the work that you do. So for our Youth Collective Empowerment Toolkit, we are going to be talking about 5 key components, and I have them listed here with some short explanations. So first thing will be team building. So really thinking about working and thinking collaboratively. How do we do that with youth and young adults? Collective thinking in and of itself. So thinking about our ability to brainstorm, problem solve, and reflect as a group, right? So we're translating everything from individual to group. Blending individual skills. During the last toolkit, we talked about empowering individual skills and individual passions. But now if we're going to work as a group, we need to talk about how to really blend those all together so that we can function as one cohesive group. Fourth would be building community. All of us exist inside of a community, and when we are talking about groups for youth and young adults, we really want to be taking them outside of our little bubble that exists in our organization or community group. How can we be engaging in the community around us to create even more effective change. And then last is group evolution. We would be doing a disservice if we didn't talk about the fact that groups evolve and change. As adults, as professionals, we know that this happens regardless of where you are. At work, in our personal lives, things evolve and change. So how can we be setting our youth and young adults up to be successful in that change process? Okay. I should also mention, if you ever have questions throughout, I will try to monitor the chat, but I'm going to lean on my friends here at Raise to, if folks ask some good questions, please feel free to jump in and talk about them. I am going to try my very hardest to complete this in a way that we can have space for questions at the end, but feel free to add them in the chat as we go along as well. So team building. So again, my first slides about each component are going to be just a very, very brief overview of the content, that literature-based stuff that we're talking about for these components, and then we'll look a little bit at what the framework's going to look like. So for team building, this is not just your icebreakers that you have in the beginning of a meeting, but really deliberate actions that work towards group cohesion. So by that, we mean thinking about what the group is working towards and making a very clear line between what each individual or what the group is doing together to those group goals. And we'll talk about how to really develop those group goals. When we think about team building, there are 4 main components to that. Again, this is going beyond just sort of rapport building, but we want to be doing some goal setting, building the interpersonal relationships between group members, clarifying roles of each individual in the bigger picture of the group, and then talking about and figuring out how to problem solve, because that's going to be different depending on the individuals in the group and what your group is actually doing. So these pieces of graphics that you're seeing on the right-hand side of these slides are really just screenshots from the actual toolkits that will eventually be published out for you all to use. I like giving you at least like a little sneak peek into what they're going to look like once you're able to have that tool and utilize it yourself. There's some more information surrounding that, but these give you the main idea of what's included. So when we look at a framework for team building, I broke it out into 3 separate things. We have setting up the ability to build our teams, really that development stage of team building. And then a step that not a lot of people talk about is the maintenance step of now you've created this team, this group that's cohesive. How do you maintain that along with all that group evolution that we'll talk about later? So for setup, we talk about 2 things. You want to understand your role and have some kind of criteria for membership. And this is really important. A lot of our organizations, we really want to include as many people as possible and bring as many people in as we can. But it's so important to establish what that criteria is going to be for membership into your group, because that's setting the individuals that might join your group up for success. So taking that time to consider what the work is that your group is going to be doing, what the individual roles and responsibilities might be, and kind of deciding if they're going to be able to meaningfully participate in those groups' activities. Understanding role is just really then that step to take to identify maybe multiple different roles that are needed in the group and helping individuals realize what they can contribute. Trying to monitor chat as well, but again, just help me out if we need to. All right, so the development stage of team building, again, 2 things, making sure we keep it inclusive and add in some socialization pieces. So if we think back to those components of team building, it's important that we are allowing members of our group to feel important and included and useful in all of that. So while we have criteria for membership, we really want to make sure that whatever it is that our group is doing is being done in an inclusive manner. So we want to set up that structure in a way to have equal and meaningful participation. So this does not mean that everyone needs to be the leader, everyone needs to run a meeting. It means that we are going to be identifying those roles and responsibilities that are best fit for the individuals in the group and allowing a very wide range of those roles so that we all feel included. Adding in socialization is so important to that team building process because we want to make sure that we are keeping that rapport up, building an extra time for everyone to get to know one another. I'm sure you all as professionals know certain coworkers that you've had more time to learn about and to maybe communicate with outside of the work perspective. You tend to work better together. You tend to be more equipped to solve problems with one another when you get to know them. In terms of that maintenance stage, we want to talk about some long-term strategies for being able to not only create and recreate those teams, but to really maintain those relationships as we move forward. And that's going to involve integrating those 4 components that we had mentioned before. So the goal setting, interpersonal relationship building, constantly clarifying roles, and developing that ability to problem solve. We want you to use this toolkit as sort of a jumping off point. And I think a lot of the components that we're talking about later on feed into this team building process, and just continue to monitor that progress and allow it to evolve as your group evolves as well. Okay. So we are moving on to our next component, which is the collective thinking component. This is really where we want to consider our collective goals as a group. We have established groups for a variety of reasons, but you really want to think about what is it that is our group's purpose? Why have we come together as a group? And what do we really want individual members to get out of being a part of this group? Or what kind of service do we want this group to provide to other people? In doing so, it's so important to be recognizing the diversity of the individuals that are within the group and avoid what is termed group think. So not really melding everybody's thoughts together into one. That's not really what we mean by group cohesion or collective thinking, but blending everything together and being respectful and recognizing that individual diversity. As such, we have some scenarios we really want to be avoiding when we're developing this collective thinking process and collective goals. So things like rationalization. So if I mention an idea that I think is really important, we want to avoid other people kind of rationalizing that away from the group. Similarly, we don't want peer pressure to be affecting us. So again, I'll use the example for myself. If I bring up an idea, we don't want everybody else to sort of gang up on that idea and say it's not so great. We want to work through that slowly. Complacency. If I'm another individual and I see some things like rationalization or peer pressure happening, sometimes group members can have a tendency to just sort of be more reserved and more shy and just go along with the group even if we think something is not a great idea. We want to make sure we're creating open space for everyone to share what their thoughts are and to process all of that as a group. Moral high grounds are also something that we want to avoid. What that means is somebody thinking that just because they're doing it for the right reason, it's the right thing to do. That's not necessarily the case with groups. Again, it all comes back to recognizing and respecting each individual diverse thinking and processing. Censorship, that really goes along with all of the other ones. We, again, want to make sure that we're creating open space for people to talk about their ideas as opposed to shutting things down immediately. And setting up structure for that is really important, which we'll talk about here in our framework. So this is a lot of text on the screen because I wanted to give you the main idea of what you'll be able to see in your toolkit. We aren't going to go through this all bit by bit. I'm going to kind of break down what's included on here so you can take it back and really maybe use some of these techniques with your teams. So when you're thinking about building some collective thinking processes, there's sort of two main points that we have here. There's group brainstorming and group reflections. So you've probably heard me mention this a couple times in different toolkits, and I will mention it again here. I am a person who loves data, but I also think it's really useful for our purposes as well and for groups themselves. So I'll always continue to have components of both things. So we have like a developing phase, and then we also have this sort of evaluation piece to make sure we're on track. So for group brainstorming, we have a few direct examples of what you can use with your groups. Round robin is probably the most familiar to folks, where you're sort of taking turns. Brain writing or brain mapping is a very free-flowing, allows flexibility and inclusivity in terms of if people are doing things in more verbal way or maybe a more written, graphic or illustrative way. Online brainstorming can be really, really great for individuals who find that they're shy speaking up in front of a group. So using our technology to really support that. So cloud-based systems, meaning anything that you can really be sharing with a group of people and they can sort of add ideas in their own time, is super helpful. In all of that, you want to make sure that you're including these 3 steps. I think these are so critical in being able to have a successful group brainstorming session. You want to be preparing individuals about, and that means a lot of things, right? So preparing your environment. So again, creating that space, whether it be physical or the creative space to allow people to share their ideas, setting up those expectations that it's a judgment-free zone, making sure that people have a clear understanding of what it is you're actually trying to brainstorm. So we just talked about collective thinking and about goals of the group. If that is the task that you want everyone to brainstorm, we really want to be outlining that in the very beginning and making sure we're checking with our group members that they're on the same page and they're ready to brainstorm that idea. Make sure you build in time for that process and don't just jump right in to whatever your brainstorming activity is. And then the last step would be kind of picking one of these and the many, many other ways that you can do group brainstorming and help them along with that. We've talked in previous toolkits about adult allies. This could be a really big step of where you come in and help to guide those brainstorming sessions, those discussions, so that the group can work through that and process together. And then afterwards, I really encourage you to do some reflection, whether it be on that process or just as a continuation of the brainstorming. And we have some questions there that you can either have them ask themselves or even use it as a basis for a discussion within your group. Check. We have a question here. So we have, when considering the idea of collective thinking, how can an adult support the group or help young adults understand the need for everyone to be heard? That is a very deep question, but a good question. I talked a little bit about the fact that adult allies need to be supporting this process. And I think that's a huge way that they need to be doing that. To very explicitly state that everyone's voice matters. I think that it's easier to do that when we clarify roles within the group as well. So if we know that each individual has a talent or a skill or a passion in something specific, we can talk about that openly, about how we all bring different things to the table, but we cannot do whatever our group's goals are unless we're all working together. I think secondary to that is the fact that we as adults, professionals, representatives, parents, need to recognize that our voice is not the important voice in that particular setting. And sometimes you might disagree with what the youth are coming to the table with, but you need to really let all that process go through and really reinforcing the fact that their voice matters, which we spoke about a little bit in the last toolkit. I hope that answered the question, but if it did not, please let me know and I will talk through that some more. Thank you for your questions. Okay. Hopefully you're starting to see how these all build or really are mixing together these components in this toolkit. Blending individual skills, we've already mentioned quite a bit, but to talk about this specifically, this is really utilizing individual skills to the group's advantage. So not for individual gain necessarily, but establishing whatever those group goals are and thinking about how our individual skills and passions can work in a benefit to those group goals, right? So to do that, I think we really need to understand group growth and the dynamics within a group so that we can talk about individual development within that context. We have 5 of the stages of group growth here. These we will actually mention later on in the toolkit as well. For this purpose, we just sort of wanted to introduce you to these 5 terms because some of them are more relevant to this process. So we have forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So you can see that this is like the life cycle of a group, and we'll talk a little bit in the framework about what that means for blending individual skills. I'm going to pause again because I see the chat lighting up, just making sure that we're all okay. Awesome. So for a framework and blending individual skills, the 3 stages that this seems to be most relevant for is the storming, norming, and performing stage. I always feel a little bit like Dr. Seuss when I'm talking about all of these stages because they all rhyme. So a storming stage, and you can read a little bit more about this in the toolkit, is exactly what it sounds like, storming. It feels a little bit chaotic. We're still trying to figure out how all the pieces come together. If you think back to new groups that you've been a part of, especially early on in the stages, you might be able to remember this, where it feels like, does anybody really know what we're doing? I'm not really sure if I know what my place in the group is. If you ever felt like that, your group was probably in the storming stage. In terms of blending individual skills at this stage, we first want to start with youth and young adults being comfortable enough to communicate their skills and interests with the entire group, which that's a really big step for a lot of people. So this might not be an easy step. This might take a lot of time to get to, but it's so important in being able to identify and clarify roles. In this stage, you might have some people have conflicting skills or conflicting passions. So you want to encourage members to really work through those differences, acknowledging that it's completely a normal part of group development and that being able to work through that is actually going to make them a stronger group in and of itself. Again, your role as an adult ally is to really guide them through that stage, maybe help them brainstorm problem-solving strategies, helping them figure out their own, really their own rhythm and how they as a group are going to solve problems or complete tasks that they were given. As you move through the storming stage, which I promise you will move through it, you get to more of the norming stage where you really do get that rhythm. So if you've ever been in a group and you felt like, okay, I know what my place is. I know where our group is trying to go. I think we're really starting to make headway on what it is that we're supposed to be doing. This is a great stage to start to diversify the roles and really clarify and solidify what each individual can be doing. We've listed some positive roles that we have here, but obviously you can take that and expand it and create so many different roles within your group. But just as an example, we have an initiator, somebody who's suggesting new ideas. Elaborators are your folks who really like to say, "Oh, that's such a great idea. What if we also do this?" So they're really elaborating on those ideas. Coordinator, I feel like I always fall into this role. So the folks who really just like to bring it all together and make sure that things are on track. An evaluator is the person who's sort of thinking of problems, not in a bad way, but in a way that's going to move the idea forward. And then your recorders who really like to keep track of the information, more of like your secretarial roles, things like that. Some of these will begin to develop naturally, but I encourage you to always kind of think about this storming stage and the communication of what different people's skills and interests were and how they can relate to really building this out. Then the last thing we have here is that performing stage. So performing does not mean an actual performance. It means actually getting stuff done. So this is that part where you know you found your role, you know other people have really found their role and their rhythm, and you're starting to get things done, and it feels good. It feels good to accomplish something as a group. In this stage, when we think about blending individual skills, we want to be reinforcing any of those roles that we developed in the norming stage. So recognizing the great job that people are doing, just as I answered in that last question, really bringing to light the fact that it took everybody doing their individual roles in order to make whatever it is that happened happen. Make sure if you're finding that there's overlap in those skills. Can we diversify a bit more? Do we need multiple people working on the same thing? Then normalize that evaluation process. So say the group is given a task, they accomplish it, they feel successful, still use that as a time to evaluate how things went. We don't only have to evaluate things when they fail. We also want to be evaluating things when they're successful so that we can reinforce what went well, we can reinforce their roles in making those things go well, and help to identify what they can do moving forward. Again, you'll see in the toolkit that these are really like life cycles of a group, meaning that they continue to circle around and around, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So we want to also mention building community. So increasing engagement with community itself, so anything outside of that little group, not only benefits youth, but it benefits the community itself as well. And it does so in three really, really big ways. Obviously, inclusivity and diversity. Anytime individuals are included or reaching out to the community around them, we're increasing the inclusivity and diversity of that community because we're beginning to blend the individuals of the greater community itself and not just sticking in those little bubbles. Social justice is increased. Nothing about us without us. We are being included in the conversation. We are including others that need to be included in that conversation. And we're really able to move forward in terms of social justice. Globalization, as we begin to think about bigger and bigger and bigger communities around us, we are including ourselves in those conversations and being a real part of that change. This all leads to an enhanced capacity for social change as well. I am very briefly talking about this. I get into it a little bit more within the toolkit, but essentially it's so important that all of our individual youth and young adults recognize their bigger role in the community around them and recognize that collectively banding together and engaging in the community can be a really, really powerful thing. So these are just some of the things you want to think about when building community. And this can be seen from both an individual and a group perspective, but all of these things combined really help to start to engage in the community. Some of these things are quicker or easier than others. So we want to think about caring friends and adults. It's like a really nice place to start when we think about expanding our horizons outside of our bubble, because we're starting with people who are closest to the youth and really starting to just establish those different perspectives or influences that we might have and can begin to build relationships around those. Once we have that step, we can kind of move towards near peers or role models. So by that, we mean individuals who are connected, but maybe a little bit more indirectly, but they're still considered in a peer group or somebody who could be a role model. So that really provides that direct representation, and it increases a youth or young adult's capacity to engage with people outside of that immediate group. Mentors and coaches. This is pretty similar, but it has a more specific function. So individuals that might directly support youth in informal capacities really starts to establish that youth adult relationship is a powerful and resourceful thing, and strengthening those helps to navigate with different challenges that you might face. So if you think about your own life, if you've ever had a mentor or a coach, building that strong relationships helps you feel more confident in being able to navigate challenges that you may have faced because you feel like you have a resource to go to. Then we can expand outside of just those individuals. We start talking about entire networks, or what they consider weak ties. It doesn't mean that the relationship is weak. It just means that that direct link to them is a little bit weaker, but we want to enhance those relationships and really highlight the importance of connecting people, even if we feel like it is a weak tie. Forces sort of that network orientation that allows for help seeking, meaning I don't always have to go to mom because mom is the only person that I trust, or my teacher is the only person that has been able to help me. I can then start to see, oh, there's a whole network of people that are kind of like mom or kind of like my teacher that will really be able to help me get through whatever it is either I'm going through or my group needs to go through. Right along with that, we talk about resources and connectors, which are individuals that can connect youth to other individuals or other networks. This, again, is very similar to network. You'll often find these connector individuals within those networks, but thinking of it as not being afraid to reach out to people, because even if they're not the person that can give me the answer, they'll be able to connect me with somebody who can. And as we begin to establish these relationships, as you can see, the circle's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Individuals, youth and young adults, are going to become more and more into contact with the people around them, building a community without really even recognize that they're doing it right away, in a direct way. So lastly, we want to talk about group evolution. So we mentioned this early on in a component, these 5 stages that you see here: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Again, you'll see that this is a cycle. So when you look in the toolkit, I think everything's sort of in a circle to really highlight the fact that this goes on continuously. There's never a moment where a group, unless the whole entire group goes through the adjourning stage, that's not going to, you're not going to revisit some of these early stages. It's important to have an understanding and not to memorize what these stages are called, but to really understand that is an evolution process and that it's completely normal, and recognizing what stage you're in so that you're able to work around that stage with all of the group. I have here that you want to repeat and evaluate often. Again, not just because I love data, but because it's important to kind of take a step back as we're sort of going with our groups to say, where are we? What does our group need? If you're at more of that storming stage, you might need to take a step back and do some legwork again for your group before moving on to the next thing. So we have another question I'm going to bring up. Oh, I thought it did, but it looks like it went away. Let me check the chat. Okay, so let's move to this framework. So we want to talk about group evolution and things that we can think about and identify within those different stages. So we want to think about who you are as a group, thinking about the individuals that make up the group, what the group does, how you do it, answering different role clarifications. Really want to look at identifying what makes the group unique and what the best fit is for your group to do. So how is your group sustained? I think way back in our very first toolkit, we talk about financial sustainability for a group. So some of these things might be important to revisit. Where are we and how did we get here? That's such an important thing to not only visit once, but to revisit as you begin to add new members. So think about the group's history, past members, activities, what the group has actually done and how they've engaged in the community in the past. You can identify any competitors, potential collaborators for what your group is looking to do, and think about what has and has not worked for the group in the past, if there is a past for your group. Where do we go next? Thinking about trends, initiatives in the organization as a bigger picture, so not just within that group, and in the field, so in the disability community, what sort of trends or initiatives are happening that we can attach ourselves to? This is like where you really want to think about that big picture of ideas and dreams of the group. Really want to identify realistic goals. So it's nice to dream, but we always want to bring it back to realistic goals that we can actually accomplish in the shorter term, and to identify barriers that we're going to need to address as we go through these stages. Then you want to get to how do we get there? So what current resources are available to us that would allow us to accomplish these things? How are we going to decide if we were successful or not? Really identifying sustainability measures for your group, step-by-step strategies for achieving your goals, higher level stuff. I recognize that not all of the groups that are on this call might be at this place, but this whole toolkit is really that last stage, as Josie mentioned, where we have a group established and are ready to sort of even begin some of these questions. And hopefully as the group evolves and grows and sustains itself, you'll want to access some of these things more and more. I did see in the chat too that a lot of this feels very theoretical, and that it doesn't feel quite as practical to maybe where you are in the step now. I really would encourage you to sort of go back to some of the earlier toolkits. So if I go back to, maybe PowerPoint will let me. Should have told you all to close your eyes before I did this. So this is a continuum, and as you can see, this all steps up because it all builds on each other. What we're talking about is really at this end of the stage for this toolkit in particular, but you can't really get here unless you master all of the other things that come before it. And that's a huge step. They are not things that occur overnight. You don't develop youth leadership in even 1 year's time. So sometimes what we're going to need to do as adult allies and as professionals working with youth and young adults is to constantly be revisiting some of these stages with the individual members of our group so that we can hopefully push more and more towards this collective empowerment and systemic change. I want to open it there for questions. And Josie, you know all of your PTIs, I think, much better, and maybe some other folks that are on the call. So if you want to add to any of that too, please feel free to some of that applicability piece.
Awesome. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, Allie. So I think that something that came up when Allie and I were actually talking about these last two toolkits was I think that a lot of parent centers, not all of them, have started youth engagement, but
Yeah.
I, in a separate life of mine, in a different role, I work with a lot of other organizations and governmental groups. They are really looking for
Yeah.
youth engagement, particularly youth with disabilities or people with disabilities in general. And as Ali and I were speaking, we realized like it's really pretty easy to get as a young adult with disability to get involved in a group that's set up for us
Hmm.
and to really do amazing work. But then as you leave the comfort of that group,
Hmm.
going into these other areas that I would potentially argue need the voice of youth with disabilities even more, that's where things start to fall apart. And so, as Ali said, the first four toolkits do build on like up to this point, but I think that we are all working to make sure that youth and people with disabilities are living their best lives,
Hmm.
fully contributing to society. And so that is where this is leading into.
And sometimes it's nice as I think an adult ally or parent professional to sort of see this end goal too, even if it feels so far out of reach at the moment, to be thinking about youth and young adults. I mean, Josie, so many other people on here can tell you, we know youth and young adults that have hit this stage and groups that have gotten to this stage. To know that that's possible and to know that that's our eventual goal for youth and young adults, to go beyond the comfort of our bubble, and to be on some of these other groups, I think it really informs some of those early stages, the youth development, the youth leadership, individual empowerment stages, because we're thinking about how we can set them up for success, not just in front of us, and in the moment, but beyond what we are doing directly with them. Any other questions? Um, I can go, if you get dizzy by going through slides, please don't look. I do have my contact information here. I think I mentioned it before. I think I failed to mention this in the last one. This does feel extremely theoretical until you're sort of in it. And I know that Josie and some other folks on the call have structure in place to help groups wherever and meet them wherever you are to really work through some of this. But as you think about this and talk about it maybe with the individuals at your organizations, please feel free to reach back out or to ask Josie, and the other individuals that you're working with to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk through what we were intending for this to be as a tool, and continue to grow from that point.
And I also want to mention over this year, I mean, probably forever, but especially this year, our youth engagement director, Everett Deibler, is going to be working with some of the RSA PTIs to go through these toolkits and say, what are the hands-on pieces that need to be made, whether it be for the group as a whole, whether it be for the individual like directors of the youth program or for the youth themselves to work through. And one thing that's so important with the information shared by Ali is every single one of the youth groups are going to look very different. And we could, I've seen this happen where people gave me or my group a tool to use that was like, okay, fill out this sheet. Okay, this next, and work through this list. And they didn't work for us. What worked was the fundamentals of here's where you are, here's where you want to go. However, with that being said, we will have some more tools to help work through these pieces. And as you being sort of the adult allies for most of you here, um, you're not going to necessarily tell the young adults, oh, we're in the storming phase right now. Like, they don't really care. But it is so important for you to start thinking, oh, here's where we are, here's hopefully where we're going. Or we're not on track. Where should we be?
We had a question, Joe's, if there is ever a time where we would meet with youth groups to provide ideas or facilitate action steps. I think you were mentioning that is going to likely be you're in Everett's role for some of these groups. But I also would encourage you, I think I've mentioned this in a couple other webinars in previous toolkits, to try as much as you can to take the ownership off of yourself and really be working with the youth and young adults to come up with what their ideas are. And even if that feels like a sometimes extremely slow, painful process, it's an important process to go through. And I think all youth, but especially youth with disabilities, are not often given the opportunity to recognize that their ideas are of value. And that's sometimes that sticking point of why it takes so long to get an idea out. Because they were not provided that opportunity previously. And that's really our job as adult allies to try to work with them. So I can't speak for Josie, but I would imagine, knowing Josie and Everett, that is likely where they would start.
And I think it was also maybe a hint and an invitation for a little vacation somewhere. So Amy, if you're in Hawaii, we'll travel to Hawaii, Florida. No, I'm kidding. There are opportunities that we could definitely, travel if the stars aligned. So definitely reach out to me. I can help support something if you actually needed somebody in person. I can't guarantee it at all, but we can definitely work. And a lot of us have some really great youth contacts in different regions. Even though Allie, Everett, and I are in Pennsylvania, and we're old, we have a lot of contacts in other states that may be able to connect you with someone who's even more awesome in your state. Oh, Hawaii, look, Allie, we got invited.
I said to Amy, I was like, North Carolina's nice too. I'll go to North Carolina.
That's true. I like North Carolina as well. But no, I'm totally joking. Even if I live in Pittsburgh, so anywhere is a gift.
Right. Anywhere outside of PA is going to be an adventure.
But yeah, so, oh my gosh, guys, like legit, you're making me want to go buy my, maybe I need to.
We're taking it on the road.
We're going to Hawaii. That's right. But seriously, if anyone wants materials, products, we are working on what will bring these toolkits to life, because they're a great foundation. And the next step is to help you make them yours. So when you are completing the survey, that's a little plug for the survey, mention that in the comments that you would like to see a tool on blank. Because we do want to know what will help you make your group the best it can be.
And maybe it's something, Josie, we're brainstorming right live on a webinar right
That's
now.
right. Here we are.
But maybe it's a best practice manual that really is related to all of these different toolkits that we developed, where we can find groups that have been doing some really cool stuff around these foundational ideas and develop something that's a specific example. So people, I think maybe folks are looking for that tangible example for each of these things.
Here's a really great question in the chat. Allie, do you want to tackle that one first?
Sure. Hold on. Some young adults do not identify with other members of the group, potentially leading to smaller groups where the group identity takes a while to develop and doesn't really feel inclusive. Yeah, I think that's, so I think we've talked about in other toolkits as well, that some of these things we are I don't want to use the term fighting against, but really that are can sometimes be barriers to group development are also just because youth and young adults are youth and young adults, and we're trying to figure it out, life out in general. So we have to sort of balance some of that. I think that's a normal um, part of that group development process. I would be curious to find and to really dig into why those individual members don't want to identify with other members of the group. Um, I can say that as an individual with a disability myself, um, I was very resistant to identifying as an individual with a disability from the group perspective. I mean, I have a physical disability. It's a very obvious disability, so I couldn't deny it outright. But to connect myself with other individuals with disabilities meant something interesting in my brain until I actually worked through that with somebody who may or may not be on this call right now. Being a part of the group
Yeah.
itself, recognizing the functionality of what that group was, helped me to clarify what my role could be so that I could feel important and useful within that group.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as focused on the identity itself, but it was more focused on the action.
Oh, I want to hit on that, Allie. And that person is in the room. But I think that it is so important to be looking at something beyond, oh shucks, we have disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Because I never went to disability camps, because that was not who I identified with.
Yep.
And so I did not want to be chalked up to the girl with the disability, even though I was.
Right.
And so when you start honing in on leadership, and with particular emphasis on the adult allies' role in helping to identify strengths and positions, I think that's so important because, as Allie mentioned, young adults with disabilities have been catered to. And I'm not using that as like charity, but like they've never been told, you're good at this, or we need you to be successful. Stuff has been carved out for them to like make it inclusive. And so sometimes just being focused on something larger, but working alongside peers with disabilities can change the whole perspective. And as Ali said, there are cliques, and there's cliques in professional jobs, there's cliques in high school. But being able to elevate all the young adults' strengths and who they are to help build that team is so important.
That's why it's really nice to establish groups that aren't just there for being a group's sake, but to actually establish those goals and work towards them. It really can't say enough about how that builds inclusion and that team building as well.
Yeah. And I'm going to push this again. This is not about, oh, you're a club for people with disabilities. It might consist of people with disabilities, but the goal is not for just disability. The goal is an outcome. The goal is movement forward or change. And so it's not, although there will be some sharing and some inadvertent therapy that happens, that's not what it is. It's about coming together for a goal. And that's how I've personally healed on so many levels, was finding those friendships that spoke truly to me and seeing myself in a different role.
I'm looking at our
Anything
time and
else?
we've hit 3 o'clock. So
I know.
anybody
If
has
you guys
any?
have any questions and we don't get all them, put them in the chat. We can continue to record for a second if you need to scoot. Or feel free to email Allie. Feel free to email me. If you go to the raisecenter.org website, there's a contact button. It will get to me. But Allie, thank you so much for all your work on these toolkits. Thank you for sharing. And everyone, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate your commitment to working with young adults. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.